to our Tech Talk on medical wearables and the new frontier of healthcare. Today, Dave Shea, commercial leader, and Josh Leedle, industrial designer, will have a robust conversation on the current state of healthcare, review what medical wearables are, and unpack the numerous design elements OEMs should consider when developing their medical devices.
Thank you, Shelby. Yeah, it's exciting to talk about medical wearables because they truly are the new frontier of healthcare. One thing we like to talk about is, the state of healthcare. As we all know, things are changing very rapidly in the healthcare space. One thing that's changing is this whole idea of really being able to treat patients at home, at work, and also at play. When you look at what we have here on the screen, when you look at telehealth, remote patient monitoring, and the self-administration of drugs, they have been things that have been changing rapidly over the last several years. One game changer that's happened over this past year and a half or so is really the acceleration of clinical trials and everything that's driven by the onset of COVID. COVID has really accelerated the landscape of being able to provide people with great care away from the hospital, away from their doctor's office, and keeping them safe at home. One thing that's important is making sure that our patients feel comfortable enough to seek out the healthcare they need. When we start talking about medical wearables in this space, one important thing we need to understand is what we define as a medical wearable. It's not a Fitbit, it's not an Apple Watch. You're referring to things that are in a much more regulated industry, things that maybe even be prescribed in most cases by a physician. Things such as continuous glucose monitors, things such as heart monitors, as well as on-body infusion type pumps. These are all things that are really being designed for the patient safety, comfort, and quality of life. Just recently I was playing golf with a good friend of mine, and, it was a hot August day here in New England, very humid, and I noticed that he was wearing a continuous glucose monitor. And he said, the ability to be able to not worry about his sugar levels, have it constantly being monitored while he's out having fun with his friends is really life-changing for him and a lot of other people that are in the same position he's in. But the one thing we need to make sure is that device has a lot of challenges to the people that are designing it. One example is just the environmental exposure that it undergoes. Heat, sun, sweat, the cold in the winter, all of those things definitely pose risks to the performance of the resin and the overall design. One quick example that he was referring to while we were there is the use of sunscreen. It was a hot, sunny day. He's got to put sunscreen on. I know personally, being in the resin industry, that sunscreen is very aggressive on plastics. And the fact that that device could handle it if a little sunscreen got on there made me think of the fact that there's a lot of design and thoughts that go into just designing that small little continuous glucose monitor on the back of his arm. And that leads me really to the next part of this discussion and the fact that, when you look at these devices, when you know the environment they're going to live in, I understand all those challenges that come in with the resin. But, Josh, who's a lot of experience in design, understands all the challenges that come into the design piece of this. Josh, can you really help me understand when you're starting a design for medical wearables, where do you kind of go to when you try to understand what the main starting points are?
Yeah, thanks, David. For me, there's two main starting points. The first is the environment of use. Now, you mentioned sunscreen and all the chemicals and the physical environment that it's going to deal with. What I'm looking at is looking at that part of the environment, but also the environment of use. And the way I define that is, what other products is it interacting with? Is it used as a standalone, or is it used in conjunction with 3, 4, sometimes 5 different products? And then where is it stored when it's not in use? How is it charged if it's a wearable? How is it refilled if it's let's say an auto injector or like a blood glucose or an insulin pump or something like that? or it has a medication that needs to be refilled, or the device itself needs to be replaced. The second, and this is where I spend most of the time when I'm trying to define the very early stages of a product and optimizing how the interface with the user interface is going to be, and that's how does the device user interface work. Essentially, this boils down to a long list of questions that need to be answered through either direct observation of the user or speaking with a group of power users. On whether these users are patients or caregivers, it depends on kind of where that program is and what the device is. But for instance, some of these questions are, who's the device for? And if we're looking at wearables and home health monitors, if we're designing for traditional healthcare, this would be clinically trained professionals. However, for the home market, this could be anyone from an 80-year-old patient that's administering their own medication, all the way to a teenager that could possibly be helping their grandparent. We're looking at any physical or cognitive symptoms that could go along with the conditions that are being treated. And then once we get into if we're looking at specifically for wearables, there's another host of questions pertaining to where on the body is it used and how long. Is it something that's held on like a bracelet where it's slid on, or is it something that's actually adhered to the body like a glucose monitoring patch or a insulin pump, cannula? And then how does the user interface with it? Does it have a screen and controls on it like the insulin pump on screen, or is it something that's entirely operated through a cell phone or an external device if the user doesn't have a cell phone? And then, once you get into medical, like dosing systems, it comes into how is it refilled? How is it activated? How do you load the device, and how do you charge the device? Dave, what are you hearing from your customers in other areas?
Yeah, what's funny is there are some challenges from our end in the sense too, where you see a device like this and it's a long-time use, so it has one set of regulatory challenges, as well as chemical resistance and cleaning, and what are they cleaning it with at the end of the day, and comfort. Does it need soft touch parts that people can activate with a finger, like buttons on here? But also, there's a single-use part to a lot of these, right? And that's a whole nother challenge. So when you combine the medical wearable, it's a very complex device. It goes from a multi-use design that maybe is meant to last for a year or 90 days minimum, to a part that might have to be changed every day, that is the delivery device. So, all of that brings so many challenges. And then you add in the whole, marketability part. The world we live in Amazon, everybody's looking for that device that looks good. So you got to worry about all the additives and the colorants and things that really make this device comfortable with somebody who's purchasing it. So those are all the things we think about from the resin side of the world. And lastly, you start thinking at that point about the things such as the human factors of the device. What really does that mean? In engineering and design, we hear the term human factors all the time now. It's kind of a newer word to me, but it's transitioning from that healthcare environment in a hospital where they not worry about what the person on the other side feels about the device, to now you need to take into all those things into consideration. And so, Josh, I understand that concept and the importance in making things easy to use and comfortable, but can you help me understand a little more in depth on this? How does this affect your design process for the ergonomics and that quote unquote human factor?
Yes, so human factors integration has been a main focus in my career, and is at the heart of how I approach a project. So typically, when it's typically when you mention ergonomics or human factors to people outside the industry, they automatically think of their ergonomic keyboard or their ergonomic mouse or the way that their HR team or whoever their company has set up comes in and arranges their cubicle or their workstation to be efficient and safe for their daily tasks. Or if you talk to traditional engineers and designers about it, they usually remember back to school and Henry Dreyfuss books, The Measure of Man, and the dimensions and the charts and all of the guides for basic ergonomics that are contained within that. However, once you start actually working in this field, you realize that there's a lot more to it than just memorizing these dimensions and these force charts and what these idealized numbers are, because the world is a changing place and there's different inputs. It's not always just a single input. There's inputs from multiple devices happening to complete a single task. Or even the users aren't all idealized people. So, if everything was an ideal situation, every device that would require high force would be a pistol grip, and any device that required high dexterity or manipulation would be a pencil, because those are the two optimized, those are the two idealized grips that out there if you go simply by the numbers. Instead, it requires the examination and the full documentation of the interaction between the device, the user, and the environment, like I had mentioned before. What other products or items is that device and user interacting with while the device is being used? When you get into wearables and home healthcare devices, it really comes down to understanding the intricacies of the disease state that is being monitored. And for instance, this is one of the examples that really opened my eyes to the importance of knowing exactly what the patient you're designing for, what their conditions is. And it was several years ago, I was working on a auto injector specifically for rheumatoid arthritis. And what we were finding when we were doing some of the early stage user research was a lot of the latter stage patients, their hands were locked into this key grip configuration because of the deformation of the joints that the disease causes. And because of that, a traditional pen style cap and trigger button on the end, if you're thinking like an EpiPen, would be it was proving to be very difficult for these users because they couldn't actually get their fingers to get into that chuck grip that you think of when you hold a pencil. So the device had to be redesigned to have several flaps on it to where they could utilize it in a key grip. And a key grip is essentially what its name is. If you think about how you start a car with a key, or you insert the key into your door, that's a key grip where you're basically pinching between your thumb and the side of your index finger. And then where they also need to, when designers are considering these effects, it's not necessarily that they're designing a better product, but what they're doing is by designing that product in a way that the users can use it on their own and not have to have a caregiver per se administer these treatments for them, they're providing some dignity to the user. And in the end of the day, that's what all these home medical devices are intended to do, is provide a sense of independence and dignity back to the patient. So what are some of the other requirements that you're hearing, David?
Yeah, no, I agree. I think some of the things that interest me around that are how important it is when we talk to customers when they're designing things to get the team that might be able to help you involved early on, right? When you work on these type of devices, Josh, how difficult is it to redesign or change the norm versus when someone kind of gives you a quote unquote blue sky opportunity and says, hey, this is where we think we want to be. let us know where you can go from here. You know, what are the key drivers to those two type of applications for you?
So it boils down to knowing what the user is and what the device is going to be used for. And it can be, depending on the history of the device, it can be difficult to change sometimes. A lot of times, if it's a short-term product or project, there might be tooling already created. And at that point, there's little tweaks you can do, but even some little tweaks and material changes can help increase the usability of the device or the experience that the user gets. Some of the blue sky ideas, if there's a paradigm between how something should work, if you don't have the observational data or the observation of the users ahead of time, it's very hard to change some people's mindsets. But once you can show how the devices are actually used in the real world, or how their patients are actually using it once they get it in their hands, it's very easy to change people's minds because you've got the information there. And it's all about, design is all about finding the information and finding the needs of the user, and then presenting that information and those needs in a way that is cost effective to the manufacturer of the device.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, I mean, really based on my experience, right, and especially in this medical wearable world, it's really all about that patient comfort, ease of use, and then for the OEM, the manufacturer, it's really about a robust device, right? And when we talk about robustness, you know, we're not just talking about what the resin or the device itself can handle, but there's a lot of things to keep in mind. You know, one is a nice, robust supply chain. You know, we've had some challenges in these last couple of years with supply chain of resins and with all the storms that are happening. And so, you know, it's important to take those things into mind when you're on the resin side of this. And then also making sure that we completely understand the regulatory needs of the device so that you have a robust certification process. You know, does it need to be ISO 10993 for biocompatibility? Does it need skin sensitization? What does the resin need to be? Do we need parts made of different resins? Do we need things that are rigid, some that are flexible? Do we need adhesives to be on the part? So, you know, colorants, things that really make your device stand out. To me, that is all wrapped into robust performance of your device. And, you know, really kind of working with a partner and a design partner. You know, one thing that we have here at Avient is the ability to touch base on all of those things. You know, Josh, I know when you started working as a designer, there was a lot of things that you kept in mind. But nowadays, I think, you know, listening to you, the materials and the resins are more top of mind. You know, what do you think it helps you if the partner you're working with can be a one-stop shop for all those needs?
Yeah, as an early designer before joining Avient's team, I was very naive in that, you know, I saw, you know, there was TPEs, there was silicones, there was metals, and there was rigid resins. And, you know, they all had their purpose, but that was about it. I never really had the opportunity or the knowledge to dig into what some of those materials could do. And like you mentioned, I like how you bring this back to robust performance. But I see it as, it's not just robust performance of materials, it's robust overall. So a robust user interface, a robust usability, and the robustness of the materials kind of ties into that with the way I see it. For instance, just thinking back to some of the projects I had before joining Avient, and then now that I know how some of the nuances of the engineered materials and how some of the formulations of the materials can help enhance the usability, some of the projects that come to mind are, you know, wet grip TPEs. So a TPE that even when wet retains its stiction and how that could have really helped out. That formulation could have really helped out some of the dental tools and stuff like that that I've worked on over the years, and that, they're wet all the time. And then some of the vibration dampening polymers that Avient has in their portfolio, and how that could have been utilized to further isolate motor vibrations for some of the electrical surgical tools. And then as I'm looking back at some of the wearables and the auto injectors, one of the big ones is density modified materials, and how just changing the specific gravity of a material could have helped improve the center of gravity and balance point for the auto injector to make it easier to handle and easier to hold for patients with low dexterity, or even just the changing of the mass of the device itself could reduce the effect of some of the tremors that patients might have in relation to the disease state. And then one of the ones that I learned about completely after joining Avient and being with Avient for a couple of years was the thermally conductive polymers. And just thinking through how some of those polymers could be utilized within the wearable market, you could easily use some of that thermally conductive material to more readily transfer body heat or even room temperature to some of the biologic medicaments that are being injected and treatments that are being injected in these auto injectors, and so that it reduces the amount of pain and discomfort during that injection.
Yeah, I think we've all been there where we received a shot of medicine and it was a bit painful, right? Because it wasn't up to room temp. So I can imagine if you're at home and you do that a few times, you're going to want something that's better. So thank you. Yeah, so one thing that we feel is really important is being able to kind of pull all this together to help with that design and that strategy. When you look at selection of materials, you look at the design, you look at product development, when you could pull all that together and do all that at the beginning of a project, it's really going to help you, get to accelerate your commercialization, get to market faster, win that device that's out in the world. Because as we all know, the customers that get out there with the design first are the ones that win the lion's share of the market. And in the long run, making sure we have a robust supply chain, a robust product, you're going to mitigate your risks, you're going to optimize your design. So here at Avient, what we really like to say is challenge accepted. Bring us your opportunities, give us a shot to work on these designs, and I think you won't be disappointed. Thank you.